What's your best full circle moment where the entitled person was finally forced to learn their lesson? My mom abandoned me when I was 16 after I got sentenced for a crime I didn't commit. But my mom didn't just think I was guilty. She made sure to let everyone know I was. She spread rumors about how I supposedly admitted to setting that daycare on fire. She lied that I had been into children ever since I was young. Even convinced my girlfriend to dump me with fake screenshots admitting guilt. She sold all my possessions and kept the money. Moved halfway across the country with her new boyfriend, who told her to choose him or me just 1 month ago. I spent 18 months in juvenile detention. No visits, no letters, no money for commissary. Other kids got birthday cards while I got silence. I watched them with their families on visiting days while I stayed in my cell. Then, the real arsonist confessed. His dad was dying and wanted to clear his conscience. Turns out, it was the daycare owner's son. He did it for an insurance payout. The security footage mysteriously appeared that had been lost before. I was released with an apology and a $50 check from the state. 17 and a half years old. No family, no home, no belongings. Foster care until 18 was hell, but I studied. Got my GED. Perfect SAT scores. Wrote essays about injustice that made admissions officers cry. I got a scholarship to a community college. Then law school. Graduated top of my class. The professor who'd been bringing me books showed up to my graduation. I became a civil rights attorney. Specialized in wrongful convictions. Won case after case. Made the news. Made money. Made peace with being alone. Started a nonprofit for kids with incarcerated parents. Named it after the daycare that burned down. Meanwhile, Mom thrived in Colorado. Facebook showed it all. Her stepson Hugh's lacrosse championships, family ski trips, Derek's promotion celebrations, beach vacations, blessed with my real family captions, Hugh's acceptance to medical school. So proud of my one son, she wrote. Last month, 8 years after she abandoned me, my phone rang at 2 a.m. unknown Colorado number. I almost didn't answer. It was Mom, sobbing. Hugh had been arrested. Bar fight. Nearly killed someone. The victim was in a coma. Hugh was facing attempted murder charges and was looking at 25 to life. She needed the best lawyer she could find. She'd seen my cases on the news. Family helps family, she said. I don't have a mother, I told her simply. She exploded instantly, called me vindictive, selfish, said I was punishing Hugh for her mistakes. Then came the manipulation. You know what wrongful conviction feels like. But Hugh wasn't wrongfully convicted. There was video, witnesses, his bloody knuckles. The next morning she showed up at my office. Flew in on a red-eye. Derek was with her. They'd aged badly. They sat in my waiting room for 6 hours. My secretary kept offering them water. They kept demanding to see me. Finally, I let them in. Mom started crying immediately. Please, he's your brother. I don't have a brother. Derek tried the man-to-man approach. Don't punish the boy for our decisions. Like you punished me for a crime I didn't commit? Then Mom pulled out photos. Hugh in his cap and gown. Hugh at Christmas. Hugh accepting some award. Look at him. He's a good kid. One mistake. I pulled out my own folder, pushed it across the desk. Inside, my booking photo at 16, the visiting log showing no visits in 18 months, her Facebook post calling me a monster, screenshots of messages she sent my girlfriend with fake confessions, the receipt for selling my car and keeping the money, foster care intake forms, night terror documentation from juvenile detention, suicide watch reports. At the bottom, a printed email she'd sent to my lawyer during my case. Stop contacting me. I have no son named Julio. That criminal is dead to me. You had 547 days to visit me, I said. That's 547 chances to be my mother. You chose 0. She stared at the papers. Derek went pale when he saw the financial documents. She'd stolen $8,000 from my college fund. That's different, she whispered. You were guilty. No, I wasn't. And you knew that. Deep down you knew. But Derek made you choose and you chose him. Now Hugh made a choice too, and he'll face the consequences alone, like I did. Please, she begged. I'll pay you anything. I stood up. You already took everything I had. Get out of my office. Derek grabbed her arm, tried to leave with dignity, but she broke free, fell to her knees, literally begging. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please. You're not sorry you abandoned me. You're sorry Hugh got arrested. You're sorry you need me now. They walked out of the office knowing I wasn't going to help. Or was I? Because that night I shot Mom a text. Let's talk. The words hung there on my phone screen for 10 seconds before I hit send. My thumb hovered over the delete button, but something in me needed to see what would happen next. She replied within 30 seconds with 15 crying emojis and, thank you, thank you, thank you, repeated 12 times. I put the phone face down on my kitchen counter and poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey. The apartment felt too quiet. I turned on the TV just for noise and sat on my couch staring at nothing. Around midnight I went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that cell. The concrete walls, the metal toilet, the scratchy blanket that never kept you warm. I could hear the other kids getting visits, their moms bringing them clean socks and homemade cookies, the guards calling names that were never mine. By 2 a.m., I was pacing my living room. By 3 a.m., I had my laptop open, looking at Mom's Facebook again. There was Hugh at his high school graduation, Hugh at prom, Hugh with his lacrosse team, always smiling, always clean cut, the golden boy who got everything I was supposed to have. At 4 a.m., I knew I couldn't do this without rules, clear boundaries, non-negotiable terms. I grabbed my phone and started typing. Meeting conditions, neutral location, public space, no Derek, no surprises, 45 minutes max, I leave when I want. Send. Her response came at 4:17 a.m., which meant she wasn't sleeping either. Yes, anything you want, just, please, help us. The immediate agreement made my stomach turn. Too easy. Too desperate. I made coffee and sat at my desk pulling up the Colorado Bar Association website. Started researching conflict of interest rules for attorneys. The guidelines were clear about family members in criminal cases. I could make referrals but couldn't represent Hugh directly even if I wanted to. Different state, different bar admission, clear ethical boundaries. Perfect excuse. I bookmarked 3 articles about attorney referral ethics and printed them out. By 6 a.m., I was showered and dressed, called my assistant to say I'd be late. Then I called Sybil Weiss's emergency line. She was the therapist who'd helped me through law school when the nightmares got bad, specialized in trauma, especially wrongful conviction survivors. She had a cancellation at 8 a.m. I took it. Her office hadn't changed. Same green walls, same worn leather chairs, same box of tissues on the side table. I told her everything. Mom's call, the visit, the photos of Hugh, my folder of evidence, the text I'd sent. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned forward. "What do you need from this situation?" she asked. We spent the next 40 minutes building a framework. I could help them find resources without betraying myself, connect them with someone qualified, set terms that protected me. We practiced responses to manipulation. That's not something I can do. I've made my position clear. This conversation is over. We role-played different scenarios. Mom crying, Derek threatening, Hugh calling directly. By the end, I had a plan, clear boundaries, specific conditions, an exit strategy. I left her office feeling steadier. At 10 a.m., I called Natalie Camacho. She chaired the board of my nonprofit, former prosecutor, current federal judge, someone whose judgment I trusted completely. I needed to disclose this situation before it became public. She answered on the second ring. I explained about Mom, Hugh's arrest, the request for help. She listened quietly, then sighed. "This could get messy for the organization," she said. I agreed. We talked through potential conflicts, media attention, donor concerns, public perception. She asked for a written plan showing how I'd keep the nonprofit separate from any family involvement. "Document everything," she said. "Every interaction, every decision, cover yourself completely." I spent the rest of the morning drafting that plan. Clear separation between personal and professional. No nonprofit resources used, no organizational involvement, full transparency with the board. Sent it to Natalie by noon. She responded within an hour. "This works. Keep me updated. Be careful." The meeting was set for 2 p.m. at a coffee shop downtown. Public, neutral, easy to leave. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a corner table with a clear path to the exit. Ordered black coffee I didn't plan to drink. Mom showed up 5 minutes early. Derek was with her. I stood to leave immediately. Mom grabbed my arm. "Please, he's just here for support." I looked at Derek. He'd aged badly. Gray stubble, bloodshot eyes, wrinkled shirt. "You have 30 seconds to leave or I'm gone," I told him. He started to argue, but Mom pushed him toward the door. He left, but stood outside where I could see him through the window. Watching. Waiting. Mom sat down across from me. Started crying immediately. Pulled out more photos of Hugh. "He's such a good kid," she said. I let her talk for 5 minutes. Hugh's grades, his volunteer work, his acceptance to medical school, how this was destroying their family, how unfair it all was. When she paused for breath, I spoke. "I won't be Hugh's lawyer." Her face crumpled. "But you said we could talk." "We are talking. I'm going to explain what I can and can't do." I pulled out the printed ethics guidelines, showed her the relevant sections, different state, different bar, conflict of interest. "But you could figure it out," she said. "You're so smart. You always were." Old manipulation. Appeal to ego. I didn't bite. "I can give you a name. Owen Kent, best defense attorney in Colorado. He'll review Hugh's case if you contact him." Her eyes lit up. "You'll call him? Recommend us?" "I'll facilitate an introduction, under certain conditions." The hope in her face made me feel nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, just tired. "What conditions?" she asked. I pulled out my phone, opened the notes app where I'd typed everything out. First, you write a public retraction of every lie you told about me. Post it on Facebook. Send it to everyone you poisoned against me. Admit you lied about the confession. Admit you lied about me and children. Admit I was innocent. The coffee shop seemed to get quieter. Mom's face went pale. Derek must have seen something because he started walking toward the door. I held up my hand to stop him. He froze outside. Second, I continued, you pay back the $8,000 you stole from my college fund. With interest. That's about $12,000 now. She opened her mouth to protest. I kept going. Third, you write letters to my ex-girlfriend, my old school, the juvenile detention center, and the local newspaper. Clear my name completely. Every single lie gets corrected. The silence stretched between us. Finally, she whispered, that's blackmail. I almost laughed. No, blackmail would be threatening to expose something to hurt you. I'm setting conditions for my assistance. You can say no. Hugh can find his own lawyer. Your choice. I stood up, started walking toward the door. She scrambled after me. Wait, I'll do it. I'll do whatever you want. I stopped, turned around. You have 1 week to complete everything. Full public retraction, full repayment, all letters sent. Then I'll connect you with Owen. Derek had made it inside now. His face was red. You piece of shit, he started. I walked past him, out the door, down the street. Behind me, I could hear Mom telling him to shut up, to not ruin this, their only chance. I made it 2 blocks before my hands started shaking, 3 blocks before I had to sit on a bench, 4 blocks before I called Sybil to schedule another emergency session. This was just the beginning. The coffee shop door hadn't even closed behind me when Derek came running out, his face red and twisted. He grabbed my shoulder and spun me around, yelling about blackmail and manipulation right there on the sidewalk, while people stopped to stare. I pulled out my phone and started recording as he kept shouting that I was taking advantage of a mother's love for her son. Mom came out and tried to pull him back, but he shook her off. I stayed calm and explained the legal definition of blackmail, how it requires threatening to expose information to cause harm, while I was simply setting conditions for voluntary assistance. He called me a piece of garbage who deserved everything that happened to me. Security from the coffee shop came out and told him to leave, or they'd call the police. Mom dragged him away while he kept yelling threats about ruining my practice. That evening, I sat in my apartment and called Owen Kent in Colorado. We'd worked together on 3 wrongful conviction cases over the years, and he knew his stuff. I explained the whole situation, from my conviction to Mom showing up now. He listened without interrupting for 20 minutes. When I finished, he said he'd review Hugh's case if the family contacted him, but warned the evidence sounded bad. I told him about my conditions for Mom, and he understood completely. He'd seen plenty of family dynamics like this in his practice. The next morning at 7, my phone rang. Owen had already pulled the police reports and reviewed the security footage from the bar. The victim had needed emergency brain surgery and might never fully recover. Hugh had thrown at least 8 punches after the guy was already on the ground. There were 12 witnesses, all with consistent stories. Owen said a plea deal with treatment programs might get Hugh down to aggravated assault with 5 to 7 years, but attempted murder carried 25 to life if convicted at trial. The reality of Hugh's situation hit me hard, even though I had no real connection to him. I spent the morning drafting a memorandum of understanding on my computer. Each word felt like taking back a piece of myself that Mom had stolen. The document laid out exactly what I'd facilitate. An introduction to Owen Kent if and only if Mom completed specific actions. She had to write individual letters to my ex-girlfriend, admitting she lied about the fake screenshots. She had to contact my old school and the juvenile detention center to clear my record. She had to post on Facebook, admitting she lied about me setting the fire and about me being interested in children. She had to begin monthly payments of $500 toward the $8,000 she stole. Every requirement was something she'd taken from me that I was now demanding back. My therapy appointment with Sybil was that afternoon. Her office always smelled like lavender and books. She listened as I explained everything that had happened since our last session. When I told her about my conditions for Mom, she nodded, but warned me about emotional whiplash. Mom might agree to everything, then immediately backslide once she got what she wanted. We spent an hour creating an exit strategy with clear boundaries. If Mom missed 1 payment, failed to send 1 letter, or tried to manipulate me emotionally, I would cut contact immediately. Sybil helped me write scripts for different scenarios Mom might try. We practiced them until I could say them without my voice shaking. She reminded me that helping Hugh didn't mean forgiving Mom, and that I could maintain boundaries while still facilitating contact with Owen. I sent the MOU to Mom's email that night, with a deadline of 72 hours to respond. Within 10 minutes, she called crying about how complicated everything was. She didn't know how to find my ex-girlfriend's contact information. She wasn't sure what to write in the letters. The Facebook post would be humiliating. The monthly payments were too much with Hugh's legal bills. I kept my responses short and professional. The ex-girlfriend's information was on her old social media. The letters needed to state she lied and I was innocent. The Facebook post was non-negotiable. The payment amount was less than the interest on what she stole. Each excuse made my irritation grow, but I stayed calm. 3 days later, Owen called to say we were going to visit Hugh at the county jail. The drive took 40 minutes through morning traffic. The jail was a gray concrete building surrounded by razor wire. We went through security, got searched, waited in a holding area with other visitors. When they brought Hugh in, he looked smaller than in Mom's photos. His orange jumpsuit hung loose on his frame. His hands shook as he sat down across from us. Owen explained who he was and that I'd connected them. Hugh kept looking at me with confusion. He asked why I was helping after everything. I told him I wasn't helping him. I was facilitating a connection with conditions attached. He started talking fast about that night at the bar, how he'd been drinking since noon, how he didn't remember most of it, how he wasn't a violent person. Owen took notes while Hugh rambled about his medical school plans being ruined. Then Hugh said something that made my chest tight. He mentioned how Mom always told him about his dangerous brother who liked to hurt little kids, who set fires for fun, who couldn't be trusted around normal people. The same lies she'd spread when I was 16 were still coming out of his mouth 8 years later. Owen noticed my reaction and changed the subject back to the legal case. On the drive back, Owen said Hugh seemed genuinely remorseful, but that wouldn't change the evidence. That night I found an email from Baptiste Garner, an investigative journalist who'd covered 2 of my wrongful conviction cases. He'd heard through sources that I might be helping my estranged mother with a criminal case involving her stepson. He wanted to know if I'd comment on the story. My stomach dropped. The last thing I needed was this becoming public before I could control the narrative. I didn't respond, but I knew he'd keep digging. The next morning, Natalie Camacho called before I'd even had coffee. The nonprofits board was meeting in 2 hours, and my attendance was mandatory. Word had already spread about my potential involvement with Hugh's case. When I walked into the conference room, all 12 board members were there. Natalie explained that several major donors had already called with concerns about the organization's mission being compromised. They wanted to know how I could help the family that abandoned me while running a nonprofit for kids with incarcerated parents. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The board requested I avoid any public statements about the situation and document every interaction with Mom and Derek. They wanted weekly updates and reserved the right to request I step back from day-to-day operations if the situation affected donations. Their support felt conditional and cold, but I understood their position. The organization was bigger than my personal drama. I went back to my office and pulled up the MOU on my computer. The original was too vague, so I started adding specific requirements. Mom needed to write letters to my ex-girlfriend admitting she lied about those screenshots. She needed to contact my old high school and tell them I was innocent. The juvenile detention center needed a letter too. And the Facebook post couldn't be some vague apology. It had to say my name, say I was innocent of the daycare fire, and admit she lied. Each new requirement I typed felt like getting a piece of myself back. Around 10 that night, my phone rang. Derek's number showed on the screen. I hit record before answering. He started yelling immediately about how I was exploiting their tragedy for revenge. Said he'd go to the media and tell them I was using Hugh's situation to blackmail them. Called me an opportunist who was turning family pain into leverage. I stayed quiet and let him rant while my phone recorded everything. When he finally ran out of steam, I told him this call was recorded and hung up. My hands were shaking, but I saved the file and emailed it to myself for backup. The next morning, I had my session with Sybil. We spent the whole hour practicing different scenarios. She pretended to be Mom crying about Hugh's future. Then she was Mom getting angry about my demands. Then she was Mom trying to guilt me about family loyalty. Each time, I practiced saying no and walking away. We did it over and over until my responses felt automatic. Sybil reminded me that leaving wasn't giving up. It was protecting myself. After the session, I went back to my office and made a detailed list for Mom. Every person she'd lied to about me needed to be contacted. My ex-girlfriend's name was at the top with her last known email. Then my high school principal, the guidance counselor who'd tried to help me, 3 teachers who'd written college recommendations before everything happened, my old boss at the grocery store where I'd worked summers, even the parents of kids I'd tutored. 23 names total. Each one represented someone who thought I was guilty because of her lies. I scanned the list and attached it to an email with the subject line, "Required Retractions." 2 days later, Mom posted on Facebook, "I want to apologize to anyone who might have been hurt by past misunderstandings. We all make mistakes, and I hope we can move forward with love." I saw it that afternoon and immediately called her, told her it wasn't enough. She needed to use my name. She needed to say the word innocent. She needed to admit she lied. She argued that people would figure it out from context. I said no deal and hung up. Owen called me that evening with news from the DA. The prosecutor was willing to consider a plea deal, but Hugh was looking at serious time. If the victim recovered fully, maybe 3 to 5 years. If there was permanent damage, could be 8 to 10. Treatment programs might reduce it, but Hugh would definitely serve time. The reality of his situation was setting in. There was no magic fix, no easy out. Hugh had hurt someone badly and would pay for it. The next morning, more news came. The victim had woken up from the coma, but something was wrong. He couldn't remember his kids' names, kept asking what year it was. The doctors were calling it moderate traumatic brain injury with cognitive impairment. Might improve with therapy, might not. Hugh's one night of drinking had changed someone's life forever. The weight of that settled over everything. This wasn't just about legal consequences anymore. A family was suffering because of what Hugh did. I called Mom that afternoon and suggested something different, a restorative justice circle with a trained facilitator, a chance for us to address the harm between us in a structured way. She said yes immediately, probably thinking it would help Hugh's case. Then she mentioned it to Derek and called back an hour later. He refused to participate, said it was psychological manipulation, and he wouldn't be part of my games. Fine by me. That evening, I stared at my ex-girlfriend's number for 20 minutes before calling. She answered on the third ring. Her voice sounded exactly the same. I explained who I was and why I was calling. She went quiet for a long moment. Then she told me everything. Mom had shown up at her house with printed screenshots of me supposedly admitting to starting the fire, messages about how I liked watching kids, how I got excited thinking about flames. All fake, but they looked real. Mom cried and said she was trying to protect her. My girlfriend was 17 and believed it. She said she'd wondered over the years if it was true, especially after seeing news stories about my wrongful conviction work. The guilt in her voice was clear. We talked for an hour. She agreed to write a statement about what Mom did. When I hung up, I felt sad about what we'd lost, but also validated. I wasn't crazy. Mom really had done those things. The next day, I was organizing old files when I found something interesting. Bank statements from right after Mom took my college money. The $8,000 went into her account on a Tuesday. On Thursday, the exact same amount was deposited into an account with Derek's name on it. 2 days. That's how long she kept my future before giving it to him. The proof was right there in black and white. Cold anger turned into focus. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about accountability. I typed up a clear message to Mom laying out exactly what would happen if she didn't follow through on the conditions I'd set. The stolen $8,000 from my college fund was documented fraud, and I had every right to pursue civil action for recovery plus damages. I attached copies of the bank statements showing the transfer from her account to Derek's and hit send. My phone started ringing immediately, but I let it go to voicemail. She left 3 messages in 10 minutes, each one more frantic than the last. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Mom texting from a hotel phone saying she'd left Derek's house for the night because she was scared of how he'd react when she told him about my demands. She said she'd comply with everything I wanted if I just gave her time to figure out the logistics. Part of me felt bad for a second, but then I remembered those 547 days of silence and put the phone down. The next morning, I was reviewing case files when my secretary knocked and said I had a collect call from the county jail. Hugh's voice came through shaky and young-sounding. He asked if I had a minute to talk about his case and whether being blackout drunk counted as intent in assault cases. The kid sounded genuinely scared, and I could hear other inmates yelling in the background. I told him straight up that I wasn't his lawyer and couldn't give him legal advice about his specific case. But I explained that, generally speaking, plea deals often took into account factors like substance abuse and first offenses. He asked about treatment programs and whether judges looked at that stuff favorably. I gave him basic information about how plea structures worked without crossing any ethical lines. He thanked me and said Mom had told him I was helping, even though he knew what she'd done to me. The call ended, and I sat there feeling weird about this kid who'd grown up hearing lies about me now, depending on my help. That afternoon, my phone started blowing up with notifications. Baptiste had published a teaser article on his news site with the headline, "Local Attorney Helps Family Who Abandoned Him During Wrongful Conviction." My stomach dropped as I read the first paragraph, which mentioned my nonprofit by name. Within an hour, Natalie was calling me about donor emails flooding in, asking if we'd lost sight of our mission helping kids with incarcerated parents. Some donors were questioning whether I was using nonprofit resources for personal family matters. Natalie scheduled an emergency board meeting for that evening and asked me to prepare a statement explaining the situation. I spent the rest of the afternoon writing an op-ed piece about boundaries and accountability that laid out my position clearly. The piece explained why being related to someone doesn't erase the harm they've caused and why proximity doesn't equal obligation. I wrote about how setting boundaries was actually an act of love for yourself and how accountability was necessary for any real healing. I sent it to a contact at the local paper who'd covered my wrongful conviction work before. She agreed to run it the next day. The board meeting was tense but productive. We drafted a transparency statement making it clear that no nonprofit resources were being used for any personal legal matters and that I was maintaining strict professional boundaries. Natalie suggested we also include information about our conflict of interest policies to reassure donors. The next morning, when the op-ed went live, the response was immediate. My inbox filled with messages from other people who'd been estranged from family members sharing their own stories. Several said they'd been struggling with guilt about maintaining boundaries with toxic relatives, and my piece helped them feel less alone. A few donors even increased their monthly contributions with notes saying they appreciated the transparency. The relief I felt was mixed with caution, because I knew this wasn't over. 3 days later, I was in my office when security called up saying there was a disturbance in the lobby. I looked at the security monitor and saw Derek stumbling around drunk and yelling at anyone who'd listen. He was shouting about how I was destroying his family and turning his wife against him. The security guard was trying to calm him down, but Derek kept getting louder. He started banging on the elevator doors, demanding to come up and face me like a man. My hands started shaking, and I felt 16 again watching adults make decisions about my life without any input from me. But I stayed in my office and let security handle it. They called the police when Derek refused to leave and started threatening to wait outside until I came down. 2 officers arrived and tried to reason with him, but he was too drunk to listen. They ended up having to physically escort him out while he screamed about lawyers ruining everything. The officers came up afterward to take my statement about what happened. They asked if I wanted to press charges for harassment or trespassing. I told them no, but asked them to file an incident report for documentation purposes. Having a paper trail felt important in case things escalated further. One officer mentioned that Derek had been ranting about his stepson being in jail and his wife leaving him. They gave me a case number and said to call if he showed up again. After they left, I sat at my desk for a long time, thinking about how one family's lies had spiraled into all this chaos. Owen called me 2 days later with news about the plea deal negotiations. The DA was willing to drop the attempted murder charge if Hugh pleaded guilty to aggravated assault. 6 months in county jail, 5 years probation, mandatory anger management and substance abuse treatment, plus full restitution to the victim. Owen thought it was fair, given the video evidence and the victim's permanent brain damage. I told Owen the deal sounded reasonable, but I wanted something else added to the conditions. Mom had to attend Al-Anon meetings and get therapy as part of our agreement for me helping with the referral. Owen said that wasn't really part of the criminal case, but I made it clear this was my requirement for continuing any involvement. He agreed to suggest it to Mom as a condition for my ongoing consultation. Mom texted me that night agreeing to everything without argument. 3 days later, she sent me a photo of herself outside an Al-Anon meeting room, with the meeting schedule visible in the background. No drama, no complaints, just the proof I'd asked for. It was the first time I'd seen her actually follow through on something without making it about her suffering. Owen called me the next week asking if I'd be willing to meet with the victim's spouse. The victim was still in the hospital with cognitive problems that might never go away. Owen thought hearing from the family might help Hugh understand the real impact of what he'd done. I agreed to go with him to the meeting at a coffee shop near the hospital. The victim's wife looked exhausted and broken. She showed us photos of her husband before the attack, playing with their kids, coaching Little League. Now he couldn't remember their names some days. She wasn't angry, just devastated about the life they'd lost. Her quiet grief hit me harder than any screaming would have. After the meeting, I told Owen he needed to push for more in the plea deal, not just basic restitution, but enough to cover ongoing medical care and lost wages. Hugh also needed to write a formal apology letter to the family, not some generic court-ordered statement, but a real acknowledgement of the harm he'd caused. Owen agreed and went back to negotiations. Hugh called me from jail 2 days later, asking for help with the apology letter. He said he didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound fake or make things worse. I told him I wouldn't write it for him or coach him on the perfect words. The only advice I gave was that sincerity mattered more than getting the words right. He needed to sit with what he'd done and write from that place, not from what he thought would sound good to a judge. A week later, Hallie Lambert contacted me about setting up a restorative justice circle between Mom and me. Natalie had recommended her as someone who specialized in family reconciliation after trauma. Hallie wanted to meet with each of us separately first, to explain the process and make sure we both understood the rules. She came to my office first and laid out how it would work. We'd sit in a circle with her facilitating. Each person would have uninterrupted time to speak, and either of us could call for a break or leave entirely if things became harmful. The goal wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but truth-telling and accountability. Mom would go first to acknowledge the harm she'd caused, then I'd have my turn to describe the impact. Hallie met with Mom the next day at her hotel, and apparently Mom tried to negotiate the format. Hallie shut that down immediately and told Mom this was the only way forward if she wanted any chance of reconnection. The circle happened 3 days later in a neutral conference room Hallie had rented. Mom started crying before she even began speaking, but Hallie reminded her to focus on acknowledgement, not her own emotions. Mom finally said the words I'd waited 8 years to hear. She admitted she chose Derek over me when he gave her an ultimatum. She admitted she knew deep down I might be innocent, but it was easier to believe I was guilty than to fight Derek. She admitted she spread lies about me to justify her abandonment to others and to herself. When my turn came, I described those 547 days in detail. The first visiting day when I kept looking at the door, thinking she'd show up. The other kids getting care packages while I got nothing. The night terrors that started after month 3. The suicide watch after month 6 when I tried to hurt myself with a plastic spoon I'd sharpened on the concrete floor. How I learned to stop hoping, because hope hurt worse than acceptance. The way I still can't trust anyone who says they care about me, because caring is just a word people use before they leave. Mom sobbed through most of it but didn't interrupt. After the circle, Hallie had prepared an affidavit for Mom to sign. It acknowledged every lie she'd told about me, admitted to stealing my college fund money, and agreed to pay restitution of $8,000 plus interest. Mom's hand shook as she signed it, but she didn't hesitate. Watching her put her name on that document felt like watching a miracle, this small act of accountability after years of denial. That night, I got an email from my ex-girlfriend with a brief statement attached. She'd heard through mutual friends about what was happening and wanted to help clear my name. Her statement confirmed that Mom had shown her fake screenshots and convinced her I was guilty. She apologized for believing the lies and said she'd send the statement to anyone who needed it for the record. Reading her words brought an unexpected sense of peace, like closing a door I didn't know was still open. Baptiste's article went live on Thursday morning, and my phone started buzzing before I even got out of bed. The headline read, "When Justice Comes Too Late, a Lawyer's 8-Year Wait for Truth," and the piece covered my wrongful conviction without making me look like a victim or a hero. He'd interviewed the daycare owner whose son had actually set the fire, got quotes from my old defense attorney about Mom's refusal to help, and included statistics about family abandonment after arrests. My nonprofit got a paragraph near the end with our donation link. By noon, we'd raised $12,000 from readers who wanted to help other kids in my situation. Natalie texted me that our website had crashed from traffic, and she was working with IT to get it back up. The article didn't mention Hugh's case directly, but anyone who could connect dots would figure it out. Mom called 6 times that afternoon, but I let them all go to voicemail. 2 days later, Owen called with news that the DA had accepted the plea deal, and Hugh's hearing was set for next Tuesday at 9 in the morning. I told him I'd be there as an observer only, and asked him to make sure Mom understood I wasn't there as family or support, just to see this through. Owen said he'd handle it, and reminded me I could leave at any time if things got uncomfortable. I marked it on my calendar and tried not to think about seeing Hugh in Court Orange instead of his medical school scrubs. Monday night, Mom texted frantically that she couldn't record the video apology because she didn't know what to say and was scared people would attack her online. I could feel my jaw tightening as I read her messages, each one more desperate than the last. At 10:30 that night, just hours before Hugh's hearing, she called crying that she needed more time to figure out the right words. I pulled up her number and typed slowly, making sure every word was clear. Either she posted the video in the next 10 minutes admitting every specific lie she'd told about me, or I was done with all of this, and she'd never hear from me again. The typing dots appeared and disappeared 5 times before she wrote back, "Okay." 7 minutes later, she sent me a link to her Facebook page. The video was shaky, and her face was puffy from crying, but she said it all. She admitted she lied about me confessing to the fire. She admitted she made up the stuff about me being into kids. She admitted she faked those screenshots to break up me and my girlfriend. She admitted she stole my college fund money and gave it to Derek. She admitted she chose her new family over her real son when he needed her most. She asked anyone who'd heard her lies to please correct any records or memories they had about me. The video had 43 views by the time I watched it. Within an hour, it had over 200. People from my old neighborhood started commenting, some saying they always suspected something was off, others admitting they'd believed her and felt terrible. My ex-girlfriend shared it with a long post about how manipulation works and why she'd fallen for the lies. The next morning, I put on my only suit and drove to the courthouse 40 minutes early. I sat in my car watching families walk in for various hearings, some crying, some angry, most just looking tired. At 8:50, I walked through security and found courtroom 3. Mom and Derek were already there in the second row. Hugh sat at the defense table with Owen, his medical school confidence replaced with the hollow look I recognized from my own time in custody. The judge called the case, and Owen stood to confirm Hugh was ready to enter his plea. Hugh's voice cracked when he said guilty to aggravated assault. The judge read out the terms: 6 months in county jail, with credit for time served, 5 years probation, mandatory anger management and substance abuse treatment, and restitution to the victim. Hugh nodded at each requirement. Then the victim's wife stood to give her statement. She talked about her husband's brain injury, how he couldn't work anymore, how their kids were scared of loud noises now, how medical bills were destroying them despite insurance. She didn't ask for revenge, just for Hugh to understand what one night of bad choices had cost their family. Her dignity while describing their daily struggles made Mom sob quietly behind me. Hugh had to turn away when she showed a photo of her husband before and after. The judge accepted the plea and set Hugh's report date for county jail. Owen shook Hugh's hand and walked over to me in the hallway afterward. He thanked me for the referral and said Hugh was lucky to avoid state prison. When he asked if I wanted to stay involved as Hugh went through the system, I told him no. This was where I stepped back. He understood and said he'd handle everything from here. We shook hands, and I watched him walk back to explain next steps to Mom and Derek. 3 days later, our nonprofit board held an emergency meeting where Natalie presented a new conflict of interest policy. Any case involving a staff member's family would automatically be referred to our partner organizations with no exceptions. The board voted unanimously to adopt it. One member mentioned Baptiste's article had brought in more donations in a week than we usually saw in 6 months. Another suggested we hire more staff to handle the increase in families, reaching out for help. After the meeting, I called Sybil and booked 3 months of weekly sessions starting immediately. She had an opening that Friday at 4. When I walked into her office, she already had tissues and water ready. We spent the first session just mapping out everything that had happened since Mom's first call. Sybil took notes while I talked, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly just letting me dump 8 years of buried feelings onto her coffee table. 2 weeks passed before the first payment notification hit my phone while I was reviewing case files at my desk. Mom had actually sent the first restitution check for $2,000, exactly as we'd agreed in the payment plan. I stared at the bank alert for maybe 30 seconds before opening my laptop and transferring every penny to the Little Stars Fire Recovery Fund, the scholarship program we'd just established for families affected by fires. The money that she'd stolen from my college fund 8 years ago would now help other kids get their education, kids whose lives got destroyed by disasters they didn't cause. That same afternoon, Derek's name popped up on my phone screen with a text I didn't expect. He wrote that he was sorry for everything and had started seeing a counselor about his control issues and wanted me to know he was working on himself. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding because some people don't deserve forgiveness, and Derek was one of them. 3 days later, Owen called to say Hugh was transferred to a rehab facility after his jail time, and they wanted to schedule a family session with a counselor present. I agreed to one meeting, just one, to establish boundaries since we'd probably cross paths again someday. The facility was 40 minutes outside the city, in a converted mansion that looked more like a country club than a treatment center. Hugh sat across from me in the meeting room, looking smaller than I remembered from the courtroom, his medical school confidence completely gone. The counselor, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, started by having us each state our expectations for any future relationship. Hugh went first and said he understood if I never wanted to see him again, but hoped maybe someday we could at least be civil. Mom sat silent in the corner, following the rule that this session was just between Hugh and me. I told him straight that we weren't family and never would be, but I could manage being polite if we ever ran into each other at holidays or whatever. The counselor helped us work out specific boundaries, including no social media connections, no casual texts or calls, only emergency contact if absolutely necessary. Hugh nodded at everything, not pushing back even once, which made me think maybe the treatment was actually working. We shook hands at the end, a formal gesture that felt right for what we were. Two strangers who happened to share some DNA through a woman who'd failed us both in different ways. Baptiste called my office the next day wanting to do a follow-up story about forgiveness and family reconciliation. I told him no, that my story had been told enough already, and asked him to focus on the systemic issues instead, like how the justice system fails kids and how wrongful convictions destroy families. He pushed a little, saying readers wanted to know how things turned out, but I held firm, and eventually he agreed to shift his focus to policy reform. That weekend, I drove out to where the daycare used to be, now a community garden that the neighborhood had built in its place. I stood there with Natalie and 2 board members as we quietly announced the scholarship program to a small group of local families. No media, no big ceremony, just us explaining how kids affected by fires could apply for education funds. One mother started crying when she heard the amount we'd raised. Her daughter's apartment had burned down last year, and they'd lost everything. Standing in that garden where everything went wrong for me, watching hope bloom on these parents' faces, felt like the right kind of closure. Mom called the following Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after our last contact as we'd agreed. She confirmed she was attending Al-Anon meetings twice a week and had made the second restitution payment. I kept the call to 4 minutes, asking only about the meetings and the payments. Nothing personal, nothing warm. She tried to extend the conversation, mentioning she'd seen news about our scholarship program, but I cut her off politely and said I had to go. After hanging up, I sat in my office looking out at the city skyline, and something shifted inside me. All these years I'd thought being alone was my burden, my punishment for a crime I didn't commit. But sitting there after handling Mom's call with perfect boundaries, after helping Hugh without betraying myself, after turning stolen money into scholarships, I realized I wasn't alone at all. I had Sybil who helped me process trauma, Natalie who protected our nonprofit's mission, Owen who respected my boundaries, even Baptiste who told my story with dignity. I had the life I'd built myself, piece by piece, from that scared kid in juvenile detention to this office where I helped other wrongfully convicted people reclaim their lives. The weight I'd carried for 8 years, the weight of Mom's lies and abandonment and betrayal, wasn't there anymore. I was free, genuinely free. Not because I had family again, but because I'd finally stopped needing them to be whole. Well, folks, that was definitely a journey. Appreciate you being here and wandering through it all with me. Until we meet again, take care. Like the video, it helps more than you think.